Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. Before we bring on tonight's guest, I've got two things I want to go over. On Friday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, YouTube versions of new shows are going to premiere, and the podcast format of those shows aren't going to be premiering until the following Wednesday. So if you want to catch shows as soon as they're available, you'll have to tune into the YouTube channel, Dogman Encounters YouTube channel, and check them out that way. If you want to listen to the shows using a podcast format, you'll have to wait until the following Wednesday to do that. The second thing is, if you're not subscribed to the Dogman Encounters YouTube channel, I'd highly recommend you do that now, because I released a special YouTube-only show titled The Shenango Valley Werewolf you should really check out. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. Tonight's guest is Terry Ann. Terry, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Vic.
Thanks for being here. Please give us a brief bio on yourself.
I'm 51. I'm married with 2 kids. I live in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. I am a foundational practitioner of reconnective healing. I've had encounters and experiences all my life with the strange, scary, and otherworldly, from ghosts and spirits to UFOs and extraterrestrials. And you could say that my life path chose me, and I've spent many years researching and or investigating the paranormal.
It's funny you mentioned that. I can't explain it, but for some people, it just seems to me like they're a magnet for these sorts of things.
Yeah, I feel that I have attracted experiences to me, not because I've asked for them, but they've just always been a part of my life from my earliest memories.
It's hard to understand why it's that way, but that does seem to be the case. Did you know how common the whole dogman on a roof scenario is before talking with me?
Absolutely not. And before I encountered Dogman Radio, I really didn't give much thought to Dogman at all.
Well, that's only natural. That's not something that you would think about in a day-to-day situation in everyday life, so that's no surprise. For the listeners, after you hear Terry Ann talk about her son Dylan's encounter, you'll understand why I threw that question at her. Terry Ann, please give us a description of Hamilton.
Well, Hamilton has a population of approximately 520,000 people. It's on the western end of the Niagara Peninsula, and it wraps around the westernmost part of Lake Ontario. Basically, it's halfway between Buffalo and Toronto. The Niagara Escarpment is a long escarpment that runs through the United States and Canada, predominantly east-west from New York State through Ontario, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Illinois. And the escarpment is most famous as the cliff over which Niagara River plunges at Niagara Falls. The escarpment runs through the middle of the city of Hamilton, basically bisecting Hamilton into an upper and lower part. And the feature about the Niagara Escarpment found in its Ontario portion is the Bruce Trail, which is a continuous 740-kilometer or 460-mile footpath. So where we live is at the base of the escarpment, and we are about a 5-minute walk to the Bruce Trail, and our house is on a main road near the city center.
There are a lot of people listening to the show tonight, Terry Ann, who don't know what an escarpment is.
An escarpment is basically a ridge of sedimentary rock that has formed. At its highest part here in Ontario, it's over 1,000 feet tall. So it's basically a wall of rock.
A pretty unique feature. What were your thoughts on cryptids before your son's encounter?
Well, Bigfoot, I always believed in Bigfoot from the time when I was little at the drive-in watching the Boggy Creek Monster. I've always been kind of fascinated with them. I, looked into the Loch Ness Monster and all the other kinds of cryptids that you hear about, although Dogman wasn't something that I really heard a lot about. It was more of just a general interest than anything.
Oh, I see. The main reason why you're here tonight is to talk about your son Dylan's encounter. How old was Dylan when he had that encounter?
About 3.5 years old.
Ooh, that's just way too young. Way too young. Did you go crazy researching Dogman after his encounter that night?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, after the encounter happened and I looked out of the window and I listened to him and he even tried to draw teeth and nails for me, or claws rather, I really, I don't know, I put it away in some section of my mind and I really didn't think about it at all. I would go through the years, I would find that I would ask him if he remembered his experience, and I would ask him again, what did you see? What do you remember? What did it look like? And as he grew up and started to articulate better, it filled in more, but it was always consistent, his story. But it really wasn't until I came across Dogman Encounters Radio and started listening that, I don't know, that place that I had put that experience became unlocked, and I've just been researching ever since. I've listened to every episode of your show. I've just spent a lot of time looking into it now.
Yeah, an experience like that will tend to have that sort of effect on you. How did your son's encounter change your life?
Well, it was another confirmation for me that reality is really stranger than fiction and that these other beings do exist. It has helped to expand my consciousness because I'm forced to question my beliefs. And even though I feel like I live in a world full of strange things, some things are easier to accept than others. But I think it's predominantly helped me to grow more in my awareness.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've got to tell you, Terry Ann, when you told me about Dylan being 3.5 when he had this experience, in a way, I was somewhat glad to hear about that age. I hate the idea that he had to have that encounter, but when you have a kid who's that young have an experience like that, the odds of that kid forgetting that encounter somewhere down the road are a lot higher, of course, than if he or she was 6 or 7 or 8. I'm hoping that sometime down the road Dylan can forget about this, but of course that's yet to be seen. Let's talk about the details of his encounter now. Please give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay, this was approximately around 2006, early evening. The kids were upstairs, my son and daughter in my room watching TV. They were sitting on my bed. The bed is a king size bed and it butts up to the wall, and as wide as the bed is, there's 3 windows that are just as wide as the bed. And he said that he was sitting there and he heard a tapping at the window, and he turned around and he saw this very large wolf looking down at him. He said that the head of it took up the whole upper pane of the middle window. He said it was just looking at him. He said that the head was, it was just, he said it was very large. He said the ears went straight up and they were pointy, and he described them as being opened up. They were facing out and to the side, like you could see the insides of them. And he said that he remembers that the ears were moving around a bit, like as if they were listening to things. The eyes, he said, were dark yellow, maybe with some green in them. He said the nose was long and looked like a German shepherd's snout. And he said when it breathed, it steamed the window. With regards to the teeth in the mouth, he said that he had seen big canine teeth, but he said that the mouth wasn't really open. When I asked him to describe it, he just opens his mouth slightly, just as if the dog man was just maybe breathing, wasn't growling or snarling or anything like that. The fur and the color, he said, was dark gray to black, and it had hair all over it, but it was short. But he could see the muscles bulging under the fur, and he made a comment about its waist and that he could see the muscles of its abs. As far as the hands go, he said that they were really strange looking and that the fur ended basically at mid-knuckle. And he was adamant when I would say, what did the nails look like? He corrects me and says, they were not nails, they were claws. at some point after he had stared at it for I'm not sure how long, he said that it jumped down from where it was on the second floor, just on a little overhang below the window. It jumped down onto our driveway, and that's when he could see the lower half of the Dogman. And he said that the legs were bent backwards. I come to realize that they're referred to as hawks now. But he said that the legs were bent backwards and that it had a tail. The hair on the tail was longer than what was on the body, and that the tail curved up, but it didn't like curl or anything, but it curved up. And he said that it looked back at him after it had jumped down, and that's when he started to call for me. He started calling Wolf, and he started calling for me, for Mummy. When I did ask him about how tall it might have been based on a tree we have in the front yard, from what I can gather, it was probably no more than 6 feet tall. And he said after he started to call for me, it turned around and on 2 legs walked, he said, quickly down the middle of the road. And it was gone. The one thing about this that really made me think was when he called me and I ran upstairs. He was 3.5. At the time, he was really having troubles with his W's, his R's, his L's. And he tried so hard, Vic, to articulate that there was a wolf on the roof. And he kept, I can hear him now trying to say, woof, roof, like really trying his hardest to tell me that there was a wolf there. Like, I had no doubt that he saw what he saw. And what was interesting when I asked him, like, how could you see it? It was nighttime out. He very quickly answered that the TV was on. And I said, well, didn't your sister see it? And he said, well, no, because she was lying there on her stomach with her chin in her hands. And when he said that, it immediately caused a flashback in my mind that that's how she used to lie, to watch TV. She would lay there, so she wasn't paying attention at all. And his answers just came so quickly and fluidly, like it just all made sense.
Well, when they're telling the truth, it all does make sense. Having said that, though, because of how extraordinary the tale was, the description of what he said he saw, was there ever a split second where you doubted him?
Maybe, but only for a split second, because I grew up having plenty of experiences, and mostly I was alone and very much doubted. Because I have had so many experiences, I only doubted him for a brief second because I've had so many experiences, I have no choice but to be open.
I want you to understand that that's not a loaded question. Your feelings are what they are. I'm not judging you, and I hope no one else judges you for at least that split second having a little bit of doubt as to whether or not that did happen. That's just totally normal. I will share this with you, though. If that experience did have to happen to him, I am so glad that he's got a mother like you instead of someone who's just closed-minded and someone who won't back him up or support him. That's really good.
Yeah, me too. And, with me doubting him, I can really understand because I've had such crazy stuff happen to me and I can still doubt. I can appreciate how when I'm telling people closest to me, who know that I speak my truth, I don't embellish, I can appreciate if it's so far-fetched for them because they haven't had the experience. I can understand that, they want to believe me, but probably doubt. So, I mean, in a way, I kind of am getting a feeling from both sides.
There's nothing wrong with that. One aspect of this that I don't understand is Dylan told you after the fact that he thought that Dogman was there to protect him. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in the fantasy part of my mind, I certainly would like to think that. And I certainly believe in guardians of one form or another, although I can't say that I've ever had any personal encounters with any. I'm glad that he thinks of it that way rather than being plagued with nightmares or anything else. So if that's how he's able to go through, the remainder of his life, I'm sure he'll always remember the encounter, but if it doesn't have him rattled, I think that's a really good thing.
Oh, no, I agree. If he has to have an experience like that, I'm so glad that it was one that he saw as being a good one instead of one that terrified him. That's about the only good thing that we can take from this.
Yeah, because beforehand, like when he had the experience, I never, at that age, when the kids were that young, I kept all of my study to myself. I wasn't watching shows in front of them. I wasn't exposing them to any of this subject matter. So when he saw what he saw, it's because he saw what he saw. It's not because he had watched a whole bunch of werewolf movies or even movies on Bigfoot or anything like that. There was no basis to what he was saying except for what he actually saw.
Even though he put a positive spin on his encounter, I'll bet going out at night was never the same for you after that.
Really, when it happened, I compartmentalized it right away and put it away. I put it away. I really didn't think consciously a lot about it. Subconsciously, perhaps. But at first, it didn't really affect me.
It wasn't really until you had plenty of time to sit down and think about it that it did, I take it.
Yeah. And that's when I came across your radio show and started listening. And that's when all the pieces started falling into place, all the anomalies that have happened since his experience that have really made me start to wonder and have definitely curbed what I do now. And even in the past, some of the thoughts that I would just randomly have appear in my head that I couldn't really explain why these thoughts were there. And now I think it's maybe just because this subject was starting to, rear its head.
Yeah, it is really alarming how common these experiences are becoming for people. It's just one of those things that's just so hard to understand about all this. Who was the first person you told about his encounter?
I think it was my husband. It might have been my best friend. But like I said, it really wasn't something. I mean, it happened, and then it was pretty well gone from my consciousness for a while. But every few years, I would find myself asking him, Dylan, do you remember? What did it look like? And I would keep visiting back on that, but I really didn't talk a lot about it.
When I ask a question like that, it would seem like a no-brainer that you would say your spouse, but depending on how that spouse is wired, it's not all that uncommon to have a situation where the person, such as you in your situation, would know that talking to your spouse about that wouldn't be a good idea. If you have a closed-minded significant other, it makes perfect sense that you would tell your sister or a brother or someone else, so that's why I threw that question at you.
Yeah, I couldn't be with someone who had a closed mind because I've had such crazy experiences, and he's aware of them, and yeah, he's open to it. He doesn't investigate it like I do, but he certainly has had his own weird things that might have happened, or he's been around when things have happened that over the years I think I'm training him.
Yeah, sure sounds like it. It's really good that he's got such an open mind to such things. It sounds to me like Dylan's got one heck of a support system in place.
Yeah, I think so too.
It might seem hard to believe that this could be so, but I want to ask you anyway, was this encounter beneficial to you in any way?
Um, it was because it it helped to confirm that reality is stranger than fiction, that these beings do exist. It helped my consciousness to grow more, because whenever you're faced with something that just doesn't fit, it really makes you question your beliefs. And the belief is really only a thought that we keep on thinking. And when we're faced with something, we have to think about it in a different way. And that just opens us up and expands us more. And I think it all just helps to introduce a world that maybe we haven't been told really exists. In fact, I believe it does. And it's just another experience that I add to my resume, I guess, and it's just added further things for me to research.
That's normally how it goes. Have you had or heard about any other Dogman incidents at your home or in your area?
Not from anyone else. No, I haven't. And yeah, it's not a topic that I freely will bring up. Although I was at a party and dropped a line of, "Oh, I've got to leave now. It's still a little light out. I just want to see if there's any dog men around on my drive home." And the reaction that I got was, "Dog man? What are you talking about? You talking about a head of a dog?" Like, it was just, no one in the group, which was a pretty wide cross section of society that was in attendance, there were no bites to that.
I'm not surprised by that, but from what you told me in the pre-interview, you have had experiences around your home that were pretty strange.
Oh, yes. Personally, for myself, yes, I've experienced some stuff. This happened after Dylan had his experience. There's been a number of times over the years where, out of nowhere, I will hear a big bang on the house. Just one bang, not a bunch of bangs, just one bang. Not the sound of a child kicking a ball against a wall or anything like that, but a bang with some real force behind it. And I've often wondered, what the heck is making my house sound like that? And after listening to your episodes, I heard that the dog man will bang on a house or throw a dead animal, though I haven't found any dead animals right beside my house. But, it's left me wondering. Also, I go out every night because I smoke. And so I'm out sometimes late at night, depending on what I'm doing. And there have been a number of times where when I'm outside, or sometimes just going to go outside and I've opened the door, I have been stopped in my tracks because the feeling that has come over me has been like full on flight. Like, all I want to do is get in the house now. Out of nowhere, I could be sitting there just minding my own business, and then not a sound. It's not like I'm smelling something or hearing anything or seeing anything, but all of a sudden, I just want to go into the house now. And the interesting thing about all of this is that since I've been researching, obviously preparing for this interview, I've been talking to my husband. And when I told him about that part, he shared with me that over the years, he's also a few times has been out here in our shed and has maybe heard a noise. Now, we've got lots of raccoons and skunks and possums that walk around at night. It's not uncommon. Cats and heat. It's not uncommon to hear things. But he shared with me that there's been a few times where the hairs have stood up on the back of his neck, and he's just felt like he has to finish up what he's doing right now and get inside. And that's something that he's never shared with me until just recently. So whether it's just conjecture on my part or not, I don't know, but I find it interesting.
You wouldn't believe how many times I've spoken with eyewitnesses who went out to take a late night smoke break only to have an encounter like that. In your research of dogmen, did you find out anything that shocked you about them, other than the fact that they exist?
Well, I was pretty shocked at just how many encounters there actually have been, how widespread they really are. And there's one thing that I don't know and that I am wondering about, and maybe you can answer for me. Do dogmen, are they, has it been kind of linked to them that they will just kill animals but not eat them? Like they'll leave a path of death in their wake, or am I mixing them up with another cryptid?
Oh no, they seem to do that a lot.
Because, that's not a real, most animals in the wild kill because they are eating it. And so I guess it's a little unnerving hearing that, dogmen will just kill for killing's sake.
Yeah, they do seem to do that all the time. In fact, it's gotten to the point where it seems like that's the norm instead of the exception. If they do kill a pet or something like that, a farm animal, in most cases it would seem that they do that and just leave the body without consuming it. Yeah, it's hard to understand. In 1992, you had an interesting experience in an apple orchard. Please tell us about what happened.
Yeah, this was located in Barrie, Ontario, which is about 2 hours, an hour and a half, 2 hours away from me, north of me. It was on 50 acres of a privately owned apple orchard. It was Halloween. It was around 92. It was either 91 or 92. And this location that I was at, I have to say, was the most hands down haunted location I have ever been to my entire life. This place was just crazy. And it was during the day, and a friend and I were taking a walk through the forest that bordered on the property, and we came upon a section of really dense thicket that was littered with bones. And these were big bones, like a cow or horse or a really big dog. And we were speculating as to what we were looking at. We figured that a neighboring farmer, maybe that's where he dumped his dead animals. I don't know what you do with farm animals when they die, but here we were standing in the middle of this dumping ground, it seemed, when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we heard a loud, deep growl sound. This sound was so intense. I can feel the feeling in my body now. The sound resonated in my body. Now I stand at 5 feet tall, and I swear that when this sound happened, it scared me so badly that I literally sprang 4 feet to where my friend was standing. I practically landed on top of him. Needless to say, we got out of the area right away, and I didn't wander too far after that. The sound was intense. It was intense.
Oh, I believe it. When they want to intimidate, they sure are good at doing that. Did that experience sour you on the woods at all, or were you able to go right back in?
No, I was able to go right back in. I was able to go right back. Not the same day and not into those woods. But, as I went through my life, it didn't stop me from going camping or biking in the forest or whatever.
Oh, well, that's good then. You do paranormal investigating as a hobby. Please tell us about that.
Yeah, part of the research that I do, there's a lot of subjects that I research on, and some stuff I just research, and some things I investigate as well. So I've done a lot of paranormal investigating as far as ghosts or spirits are concerned. I've been to like the Ohio State Reformatory and Rolling Hills Asylum and other locations that are, less well known, and have captured lots of EVP, which is electronic voice phenomena for those that might not know. That's when you can capture sounds on a recording when there's no other sounds around. It's like the recording can pick up a higher audible range. And my investigating with the paranormal has led me into researching now on Dogman.
As a direct result of you investigating the Dogman phenomenon, you turned up some interesting material regarding cynocephaly in dogmen. From what I understand, you think there's a link between the two. Please tell us about that.
It's just my own thoughts because of the subjects that I've spent my time exploring, such as ancient aliens, extraterrestrials, mythologies and religions, and the paranormal in all of its glory. It seems to be a common thread through all of these subjects where you can find references to dogmen. So the first thing I came up with when I started researching it was a reference to cynocephaly. And cyno means dog and cephalus means head. And it seems that from what I found, the references seem to be talking about different types of cynocephaly or dogmen. They range from vicious killers to saintly beings. Obviously, you have Anubis in the Egyptian pantheon, and Anubis was often depicted as a warrior. And there were other gods that I wouldn't even try to pronounce that had jackal, wolf-like heads as well. 14 Times, which is a magazine, in April of 2012, featured the strange history of dog-headed men. And in that, it mentions about the deserts of western Libya, where there are 5 different sites of rock carvings that are approximately 4,000 years old. And animals like giraffes and elephants are accurately depicted. But in one location, one of the carvings shows 2 dog-headed men dragging away the body of a rhino. And in the article it says, or possibly using magic to control it. Another site has a carving that shows a dog-headed human carrying a club with a dog-headed baby at its feet. Another carving shows a dog-headed man carrying a bison on its shoulders. And what's interesting is that this all seems to be backed up by early writings, because somewhere between 450 and 420 BC, Herodotus writes about locating dog-headed men in Libya that lived in the forests. And then we have the Greek doctor Ctesias, who was the doctor to the king of Persia in the last years of the 4th century BC. And he wrote of dog-headed men. He was quoted as saying, "On these mountains there live men with the head of a dog, whose clothing is the skin of wild beasts. They speak no language, but bark like dogs, and in this manner make themselves understood by each other. Their teeth are larger than those of dogs, their nails like those of these animals, but longer and rounder. They inhabit the mountains as far as the river Indus. Their complexion is swarthy. They are extremely just, like the rest of the Indians with whom they associate. They understand the English language, but are unable to converse, only barking or making signs with their hands and fingers by way of a reply, like the deaf and dumb. They are called by the Indians kalistri. In Greek, it's cynocephaly. They live on raw meat, and they number about 120,000. So that's the end of the quote. From the Middle Ages comes one of the most famous works, the Romance of Alexander, which is a collection of legends concerning the mystical exploits of Alexander the Great. In there, it featured dog-headed men as warlike man-eating giants, and they were considered one of the unclean races that also included the Amazons and the biblical peoples of Gog and Magog. Published around 1300 in the travelogue of Marco Polo, he wrote of an unnamed island in the Indies that, quote, "All the men of this island have heads like dogs and teeth and eyes like dogs. For I assure you that the whole aspect of their faces is that of big mastiffs. They are a very cruel race. Whenever they can get a hold of a man who is not one of their own, they devour him." End of quote. Christian theologians, such as St. Augustine, debated about the existence of dog-headed races, and there are images of St. Christopher with a dog's head. And what makes me think that perhaps they're associated with dogmen is because you've got some nice ones, you've got some mean ones, but I've come across even more stuff. In 1969, there was a Dutch book written by Stefan Denarden called Alien Civilization. And he writes about how he encountered short aliens with dog-like faces and gray skin from the planet Iagra. They had a single collective mind rather than individual minds, and values echoing the missionary dog-headed saints of medieval theology, like St. Christopher. So here we have an entirely different set that could explain how a lot of the biblical illuminated drawings, there's interactions with these dog-headed people, and perhaps there's different species. Hunting the American Werewolf, the author Linda Godfrey described her email correspondence with Noah, who claimed to be a remote viewer who had viewed the Bay Road, Wisconsin man-wolf cluster area. This allegedly revealed to him that a scout cast of subterranean, 7-foot-tall, extraterrestrial, Anubis-type cyborg warriors with bioengineered armor under their fur had been left behind after a war with another cyborg race for control of the Earth many aeons ago. Godfrey concedes that there is an absence of tangible proof for Noah's claims. But then I came across a Native American named Robert Morning Sky, and he produced a work many decades ago entitled The Terra Papers, The Hidden History of Planet Earth. And here he gives his theory about the different races from different star systems that at one time or another had control or fought for control of the Earth. He talks about when the Aryan Empire were in control, and the Aryans were reptilians from Orion. And he speaks about the unexpected evolution of another race in the star system Sirius that posed a threat to the Aryan Empire. Though not as old or as advanced as the reptilians, the warriors of the Canus Empire, a dog-like race similar to wolves, made up for any lack with their fierceness. Even the most disciplined of the Aryan warriors feared these vicious and barbaric Syrian warriors who stopped to devour the flesh of their enemies on the battlefield. So I find it all interesting because you have all of these references from different people coming from different angles, but when you keep digging, you find that there's references from an entirely different angle that might seem out of this world, but it seems to lend credence to what the other people are saying. I mean, that's as far down the rabbit hole as I've gone, but that's what I found out in my research.
A lot of the things you just shared with us are hard to believe. That goes without saying. But that doesn't mean that they aren't necessarily true. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm not saying that they're not true, but how much of this do you believe yourself? Not to put you on the spot or anything, but I'm curious to find out.
I think I've already said it right from the beginning. I really have had such crazy encounters. I've seen UFOs. I've had what I believe to be extraterrestrial, or I even now, at this point in my life, I'm leaning towards interdimensional encounters with beings. I can't not believe in it. I mean, I try and keep myself in check as much as possible, but it's really hard when you come across something that is real and in your face. It doesn't really matter what anyone else says about it. You know the truth. You know what you believe because you've had the experience.
There's nothing like seeing for believing, so I can understand that. Shifting gears here, you found out that there's a U.S. Army werewolf sniper manual. Please tell us about that.
Yeah, I came across this in addition through my research, and so I started to look it up. I was actually a little bit excited when I saw it. I just thought, wow, this is real confirmation. You can purchase this on Amazon. It's called the U.S. Army Werewolf Sniper Manual, Department of the Army. Apparently, it has 100 plus illustrations of werewolf tracking and sniping techniques and equipment. But then the cover of it has fur. But I did more digging into that, and I found an archived thread on a website where somebody was asking what was up with this manual. And apparently someone responded that it is verbatim for the U.S. Army's sniper manual, except that they've added werewolf or lycanthrope in here and there. But otherwise, it's identical, picture to picture, word to word. Although I really believe that the military or those secret groups know about a lot of stuff, I don't think that there's a lot of credence to this specific manual. I think it's more of a, somebody's putting it out, let's make some money.
Yeah, that's quite likely what's going on there. Although, what I wouldn't give to find out what exactly the government does know about this whole Dogman phenomenon. That would be a really good read.
Yeah.
You know that would. You talked about going down the rabbit hole with the whole cynocephaly topic, but we're really about to head down the rabbit hole with this next topic I'm about to ask you about. And that is, you go to a hunt camp every year. Last year when you went, you heard a strange woo-hoo sound. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, this is a hunt camp about 200 miles north of us. It's very, very remote. It's quite an effort just to get to the camp, surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of acres of just dense forest and swamp. We're the only cabin on the entire lake. There is another cabin on a lake which is right beside ours, but I'm not aware that anyone was up at the time of what happened to us. So my husband and I were at the campfire one night, and all of a sudden, I saw a red orb come. It came from it just came from the area of the cabin, and I tracked it in front of my eyes. Like I tracked it was always. It seemed like it was just to the side of the side of my vision, and I tracked it until it went into the forest. It was quite large, I don't know, the size of an apple or something, and I was quite surprised by it all because, well, I wasn't expecting to see a red orb in the middle of nowhere, and my husband actually said that he had just noticed an orb on the top of the cabin, but had put it off to, we had the wood burning stove going on the inside, so maybe it was embers coming out. Later on, still sitting outside, we heard two separate times, maybe a half an hour apart, 20 minutes apart from one sound to another. We heard in the distance, it sounded like woo-hoo or ooh-hoo, or it just had that woo sort of sound. It sounded really loud, but it sounded really far away. But it was loud, but it was far away. Like we knew that it was far away, but we were really surprised because we couldn't figure out where that could possibly have been coming from because we are so secluded up there. And then later that night, I went to bed and woke up middle of the night. There's this cabin. There's just nothing around, and you can hear a mouse walk. And I looked out the window that was across from me on the other side of the cabin, and the window was lit up with red and white lights. And they were moving back and forth, and I can't remember if they were moving up and down horizontally or side to side vertically, but it was red and then white and then red and then white and then red and then white. And I stared at it long enough until I couldn't help myself. I had to go and look. I went outside. Surprisingly, especially with my experiences with UFOs and whatnot, I never looked up in the sky, but I never saw anything either. And I went in the house and went to bed. Oh, one thing I want to add, that where that window was, if you were to stand on the outside of the cabin facing that window, in order to look into the window, well, it's a good 7 or 8 feet off the ground from where there's a steep hill that runs almost right away from the cabin. After I had come in, I fell asleep, and I had the strangest dream where I was with a bunch of people and we went into a place that had the most beautiful looking food I've ever seen in my life. I never in my life have ever described food as beautiful before. But here it was. Here I was with these people and this most incredibly beautiful food. The people I was with, they immediately started to eat the food, and immediately me in the dream, I just knew there was something wrong. I knew to stay away from the food. I knew not to eat or drink anything, and I knew that I had to get out. I left the hall where this food was. There was some short, round men. I said, I have to go. I can't be a part of this. And they said, well, that's what happens when you eat. And I said, what's that? And there was a mirror there. And I looked in the mirror, and the next thing I know, it was like I had aged hundreds of years. And I woke up from the dream. And immediately, what I thought about was all the stories that I've heard about with regards to, the fairy folk or, the underworld, where you really aren't supposed to eat or drink anything lest you be trapped. So, I mean, I know that really isn't Dogman, and the only part of that really is Dogman related is, the woohoos that I heard, but it certainly adds to my now increased nervousness when I go out.
Well, after you talked about what your son's been through and after your experiences, I think we could all understand why you'd have some apprehension about going out into the woods now. That dream does sound like a pretty strange one, by the way. I'm not the one to make fun of you because I know I've had my fair share of awfully strange ones too, but why don't you think it was a person that had made that woohoo sound?
Well, because it was really far away, the sound, and we hadn't heard, in the time that we were there a week, we hadn't heard any other people around, any gunshots, which is, even though it wasn't hunting season, when you're out in the middle of nowhere, it's very easy to set up targets and just practice. And we're just so far away from anyone that it just really seems odd that it would have been someone. And if it was a bunch of guys in the other cabin and the other hunt camp that's on the other lake, then there'd be more than one woohoo, because then it would be sort of in line with them perhaps drinking and woohoo and one starts and the other starts and you get a bunch of rowdies going on. But that wasn't the case. It was just a single sound. And then there was nothing else. And then 15 minutes, 25 minutes later, we heard it again. I think we went in shortly after that.
I can't say I blame you. You mentioned the orbs of light you saw. I don't understand it, but orbs of light like that are commonly associated with Dogman and Sasquatch encounters. Did you know that?
I knew about Sasquatch, but not so much about Dogman.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, I had heard about Sasquatch, but now that it's Dogman too, it just all becomes more unnerving, because I've had these experiences like the time in the apple orchard. That happened around Halloween. Now I've listened to some of your episodes, and it seems like sometimes these things are seen around Halloween. So I find that it's interesting that in my brief little encounters, that my encounters match up with a lot of the things that I've heard in reference to Dogman. So it's just more reason for validation.
Well, the fact that all these things that you've been experiencing, the fact that they line up with what you've heard, that just points towards the fact that they're genuine and real, so that's impressive. Wrapping the show up, with even the worst experience, there are positive things that can be taken from them. Did your son's encounter teach you anything about yourself?
Well, I think it taught me to trust in myself more, to trust in the experience that I have had. Like, for instance, I would go mountain biking on the trails around here. And last year, I started imagining when I would be on the trail by myself, surrounded by ravine and forest and waterfalls. And I would think, I wonder if there's anything out here that could just jump out at me. And it's not like I normally think like that. I'm biking. I'm not really thinking of anything. I'm thinking like, oh my God, I want this to stop. I'm tired or whatever. But I'm really not thinking about that kind of thing. But these thoughts sometimes come into my head on my own. And so how has it changed me? It's changed me in making me really just more aware of my surroundings, paying attention to what my instincts say to me and following up on those instincts.
Because of that good mindset you have, a lot of things to do with this experience that Dylan had, and ones that you've had too, are going to be a lot easier for you to deal with than, say, for someone else who doesn't have such a healthy outlook on things. But keep in mind down the road, if you or if Dylan have any trouble dealing with things like that, please do keep me on speed dial. I'm always here and I'd be glad to help. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Well, I guess just that, I came on Dogman Encounters Radio because I wanted to add my experience to the ever increasing volume of testimony that I believe, just like many other subjects, will eventually become too hard to deny. And I know that anytime I have had some scary experience, it sure did help when I could find and read about the subject or hear about other people's experiences. It helps to let you know that you aren't crazy. It helps when you are forced to, redefine your beliefs. And I think that's what this show offers. The show helps you to know that you aren't alone, and hopefully these stories can help someone going through their own process. I may not have actually seen a dogman with my own eyes, but after having listened to the Dogman Encounters episodes and having spent a little time researching the topic, I cannot deny belief in their existence. Albert Einstein said, "It's entirely possible that behind the perception of our senses, worlds are hidden which we are unaware." So, thanks for helping us broaden our perception, Vic. It's been very enjoyable being on your show, and thanks for having me.
Oh, it's been a blast having you on the show. Understand that the main purpose of the show is to grow by showing. Showing that so many other people have had experiences like this is a tremendous help for eyewitnesses such as Dylan and other people who have encounters with dogmen. So I'm just glad to hear that it's doing what it's supposed to do. Thanks again so much for coming on, Terry Ann. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Vic.
You're welcome. Have a great night.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.